Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Today's topic is one of the most discussed issues in global economics, the US-China tariff war. This topic is not just about two countries placing taxes on each other's products. It's about how deeply connected our world has become and how one economic decision can affect prices, jobs, and businesses across the planet.
That's right, Adam. And before we dive deeper into the story, we want to remind our listeners that the English Globe is not just a podcast. It's a learning space. If you're listening right now, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We love hearing your thoughts and experiences. Also, share your opinion. Do you think the tariff war made the global economy stronger or weaker?
That's a great way to start, Julia. So, let's talk about why this topic is so important. When we say tariff war, it means that two countries start charging extra taxes, called tariffs, on each other's goods. Imagine you buy a smartphone that is made in another country. If your government adds a tariff on that phone, its price will increase in your local market. Now think about this happening between two of the world's biggest economies, the United States and China.
Exactly, Adam. The US and China are not just trading partners. They are the two largest economies in the world. They trade billions of dollars worth of goods every year, from clothes and electronics to cars and machinery. When these two countries start a tariff war, it's not just about them. It affects everyone, from small factory workers to large companies, from students to teachers, and even to you, dear listeners.
Many people may wonder why such a war began in the first place. Some say it was about protecting local industries. Others say it was about power and competition. But at its core, it's a story about global balance, who makes what, who sells it, and who benefits. For English learners, understanding this is very helpful, because you'll often see these words, tariff, trade, exports, imports, and deficit, in international news and business articles.
Yes, and as we discuss these topics, we'll explain every important term in simple language. For example, a tariff is a tax that a country puts on goods coming from another country. If the US puts a tariff on Chinese steel, it means companies in America must pay extra money to bring Chinese steel into their country. This makes Chinese products more expensive in the US, and it also encourages American companies to buy steel made inside the US.
That sounds fair in theory, but in reality, it creates a lot of tension. When one country raises tariffs, the other country usually responds with more tariffs. It becomes like a chain reaction, a kind of economic ping-pong. Both sides start to lose because prices go up and businesses suffer. This is why economists often warn that trade wars are dangerous for global stability.
And that's where today's discussion becomes really important for English learners. Because this story is not just about economics, it's also about communication, decision-making, and how countries interact with one another. It's about how global events can shape the life of an ordinary person. For example, a student buying a laptop might have to pay more because of tariffs. A farmer selling products overseas might lose business because of changing trade rules.
Let's also think about how this war affected global relationships. The US and China are deeply linked through trade. American companies rely on Chinese manufacturing, and China depends on the American market to sell its products. So, when they start putting tariffs on each other, it shakes the world economy. Investors, governments, and even families feel uncertain about the future. It's like pulling one thread and watching the whole fabric move.
Absolutely. And we're discussing this not to take sides, but to help everyone understand the language of global economics in an easy and educational way. Our goal on the English Globe is to make these complex ideas simple. So, while we explore this topic, we'll teach you new vocabulary, expressions, and examples that you can use in your English conversations and writing.
Speaking of language, here are a few key words to remember from this section: tariff, import, export, trade war, supply chain, and deficit. Try to write them down and think of simple sentences using these words. For example, my country imports fruit from other countries, or a trade war can increase prices. Practicing with real examples will help you remember better.
That's a smart tip, Adam. And for our listeners who want to improve their listening skills, pay attention to how we pronounce these words. Repeat them after us in your mind. Learning English is not just about reading. It's about listening and understanding real-life contexts, like how world events connect to language and learning.
Now, before we move to the next part, let's reflect for a moment. The US-China tariff war started as a government policy, but its effects reached homes and wallets everywhere. It made people realize how dependent we are on each other. From smartphones to clothes, from cars to furniture, many things we use daily cross several borders before they reach us.
That's so true. The global economy is like a web. Every country is a part of it. When one side of the web shakes, the rest feels the vibration. That's why it's essential for all of us, students, workers, business people, to understand global economic issues. They help us think critically about how our world functions and how decisions made by governments can affect our daily lives.
And remember, dear listeners, we want to hear your voice too. What do you think about global trade wars? Do you think they protect local businesses, or do they make life harder for ordinary people? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from, whether it's the US, China, India, the UK, or anywhere else in the world. Your opinions help us make the English globe better every day.
Yes, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy learning with us. Every like and comment motivates us to bring more educational podcasts for you. And if you have a topic suggestion, something you'd like us to discuss in the next episode, let us know. We always read your feedback.
So, as we begin this journey into understanding the US-China tariff war, keep in mind that this is more than just a political or economic issue. It's a story about human connection, about global change, and about how the smallest decisions can have the biggest effects. Stay with us as we explore this fascinating topic step by step, and most importantly, keep learning and practicing your English along the way. Now that we've introduced the idea of tariffs and trade wars, let's travel back in time to understand how this economic conflict between the United States and China actually began. The story of the US-China tariff war didn't start overnight. It was the result of many years of trade disagreements, political discussions, and economic competition that slowly built tension between the two biggest economies on Earth.
Exactly, Adam. If we look back, the United States and China have had a long and complex trade relationship. For decades, American companies have bought goods from China because they are often cheaper to produce there. China became known as the factory of the world because it manufactured products for almost every major international brand. This trade system worked well for both sides, until questions about fairness, quality, and control began to rise.
Yes, and one of the main reasons for tension was something called the trade imbalance. In simple words, this means that the US was importing much more from China than it was exporting to China. Imagine if you buy many things from your friend every day, but your friend never buys anything from you. Sooner or later, you might feel the situation is unfair. That's what the US government began to feel about its trade relationship with China.
And to make things even more complicated, there were also concerns about intellectual property, the protection of inventions, technology, and creative ideas. Many American companies claimed that Chinese companies were using or copying their technologies without proper permission. This created a strong sense of mistrust between the two sides. The US wanted stricter rules, while China believed it was being unfairly targeted.
Another major issue was the idea of technology transfer. This means that when a foreign company wants to do business in China, it sometimes has to share its technology or business secrets with a local Chinese partner. American businesses argued that this rule was forcing them to give away their valuable knowledge, which could later be used against them in competition. This debate became one of the key sparks that lit the fire of the tariff war.
Let's also remember that during the early 2000s, China's economy grew at an incredible speed. Factories were opening every day, cities were developing rapidly, and millions of people were moving out of poverty. China became a powerful economic force, exporting everything from clothes and furniture to electronics and cars. Many experts say that the world had never seen such fast growth in modern history. But with power comes competition, and that's where the US started to worry.
Exactly. The US government began to fear that China's growing power could threaten its own industrial and technological leadership. So, when new political leaders came to power in the US, they promised to fix what they called unfair trade practices. Around 2017, this promise turned into action. The US decided to review all its trade agreements and began to introduce new tariffs on several Chinese products, especially steel, aluminum, and technology equipment.
That was the moment when the trade tension officially turned into a tariff war. China quickly responded by placing tariffs on American products too, such as soybeans, cars, and other goods that were important to US exporters. It became a cycle of action and reaction, where both countries tried to show their strength. Economists and political analysts around the world watched closely because the global economy was now standing at a critical point.
Yes, and it's important to understand that this wasn't just a political move. It had real effects on people's lives. When tariffs increased, companies had to pay more to import goods. To cover those extra costs, they often raised prices. This meant that consumers, people like you and me, ended up paying more for the same products. So, a trade war that started in government offices slowly reached people's homes, stores, and even classrooms.
That's a great point, Adam, and it also affected farmers and small business owners in both countries. For example, many American farmers depended on selling soybeans and agricultural products to China. When China imposed tariffs on those products, farmers lost one of their biggest markets. On the other side, Chinese companies that sold electronics or clothing to the US faced higher taxes, which made their products more expensive for American buyers.
It's also interesting to note that before the tariff war, both countries were trying to maintain a peaceful trading relationship. They were part of major economic discussions and global forums. But once tariffs started to rise, the tone changed. Negotiations became tougher, and trust began to fade. The world saw that two nations that once depended on each other for trade were now challenging each other for control and influence.
Yes. And for English learners, it's important to remember some of the key vocabulary from this story: trade deficit, intellectual property, technology transfer, tariff, and negotiation. These words are often used in business news and international discussions. Understanding them helps you not only improve your English, but also understand how global events are connected to everyday life.
Let's break one of them down a bit more. Trade deficit. It means when a country imports more than it exports. In this case, the US was buying a lot from China, but selling less in return. That difference is called a trade deficit. Some leaders see it as a problem, while others say it's normal in a global economy. But in this case, it became a major reason for political and economic debate.
Another key phrase is intellectual property rights. These are the legal rights that protect your ideas and inventions. For example, if you design a new phone or write a book, you own that idea, and no one else can copy it without permission. The US accused China of not respecting these rights, while China argued that it was improving its laws and regulations to protect them better.
So, to sum up this part, the US-China tariff war began because of several deep-rooted issues: trade imbalance, intellectual property concerns, and growing economic competition. Both countries wanted to protect their industries and show strength, but the result was global uncertainty. Factories slowed down, prices went up, and companies started looking for new markets and suppliers.
That's right. And it's amazing how something as simple as a tax on imported goods can change the way the whole world does business. The tariff war wasn't just a battle of numbers or policies, it was a reflection of how modern economies are connected. It showed us that no country can act completely alone anymore because the effects of its actions quickly spread across the globe.
So, dear listeners, as you can see, this story is more than just about politics or economics. It's about global connection. Every product you buy has a story that travels across borders. The trade war reminds us of how small our world has become and how much our daily lives depend on international cooperation. And as English learners, understanding this topic helps you not only with vocabulary, but also with global awareness.
That's a great takeaway, Adam. And before we move forward, we'd love to know your opinion. What do you think caused the trade war between the US and China? Was it fair competition, or was it a result of misunderstanding and fear? Share your views in the comments section below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the English Globe for more educational discussions that help you grow both in knowledge and in English.
Yes, your support means a lot to us. When you engage with our content, you help us bring more global topics to you in a simple, clear, and learner-friendly way. In the next part of this series, we'll explore the real economic goals behind the tariffs, what both countries wanted to achieve, and how those goals shaped the world economy. So stay tuned, keep learning, and remember, understanding global issues is one of the best ways to become a fluent English speaker. Now that we've explored how the US-China tariff war began, it's time to understand why both nations chose this path. What were they really trying to achieve? Tariffs are not random taxes. They are tools used by governments to influence trade, protect local industries, and sometimes send political messages. The US and China both had specific goals, and understanding them helps us see the bigger picture of global economics.
That's right, Adam. Let's start with the United States. One of its main goals was to protect domestic industries. Many American factories had closed or moved overseas over the years because production was cheaper in countries like China. The US government wanted to bring manufacturing back home, a process called reshoring. By placing tariffs on imported goods, especially from China, they hoped companies would start producing more within the US to avoid extra taxes.
Yes, and that idea connects to another important term, trade balance. The US had a large trade deficit with China, meaning it was buying far more from China than it was selling there. The government wanted to reduce this gap. The logic was simple. If Chinese goods became more expensive because of tariffs, Americans might buy fewer of them, which could help local businesses grow. But as we'll see later, in a global economy, things are rarely that simple.
Exactly. On the Chinese side, the goal was to defend its economic position and maintain growth. China didn't want to appear weak or dependent. When the US introduced tariffs, China quickly responded with its own. This was a message that it would protect its industries too. China's economy relied heavily on exports, but it also wanted to show that it was becoming more self-reliant, that it could stand strong even in a trade conflict.
And here comes an interesting concept for our English learners: economic strategy. Tariffs were part of a larger strategy for both countries. The US used tariffs to push China into changing certain business practices, like technology transfer or subsidies to local companies. Meanwhile, China used counter-tariffs to pressure the US politically and economically, hoping to bring them back to the negotiation table on fairer terms.
Many analysts also say that this conflict was not just about goods or products. It was about global leadership. The US has been a dominant economic power for decades, while China has grown rapidly and challenged that position. The tariff war was in some ways a symbol of competition for influence in technology, manufacturing, and global markets. It was a power struggle disguised as an economic disagreement.
That's a very good observation. Let's look more closely at the American goals again. Protecting local jobs was one of the main promises made by US leaders. They believed that by reducing cheap imports from China, local factories could reopen and workers would get back their jobs. It was also a political goal, showing people that the government was taking action to defend American workers from what it called unfair trade practices.
Yes, and this brings us to another useful term: protectionism. Protectionism is an economic policy that focuses on protecting a country's industries from foreign competition by using tariffs or import restrictions. In theory, it helps domestic businesses grow. However, in practice, it can make goods more expensive and limit consumer choices. The US adopted this protectionist approach during the tariff war, hoping it would bring long-term benefits.
But the results were mixed. Some industries did see small improvements, while others suffered because they depended on Chinese parts or materials. For example, many American electronics companies used components made in China. When tariffs increased, their costs went up, and they had to either raise prices or reduce profits. This shows how interconnected the global economy has become. You can't just separate one part without affecting the rest.
China's goals, on the other hand, were also multi-layered. It wanted to protect its export-based economy, support local producers, and continue its ambitious plan called Made in China 2025. This plan aimed to make China a global leader in advanced industries such as robotics, aerospace, and artificial intelligence. By investing in technology and innovation, China hoped to move from being the world's factory to being a world leader in innovation.
And that's why technology became such a key battlefield in this trade war. The US accused China of using unfair methods to gain access to American technology, while China said it was simply developing its own. Both sides had economic goals that mixed with national pride and competition. It was no longer only about tariffs, it was about the future. Who would lead the next generation of global industries?
Let's also talk about another important goal: negotiation power. By using tariffs, both countries wanted to create pressure that would bring the other side to sign a more favorable trade deal. For example, the US wanted China to buy more American products and to open its markets to American companies. China, meanwhile, wanted to show that it would not be forced into an agreement by external pressure. It was a complex game of diplomacy and economics.
Yes, and this game had no easy winners. Each side believed it was protecting its people and economy, but the global market doesn't work like a zero-sum contest. When trade becomes more expensive, everyone feels it: consumers, companies, and even neighboring countries. That's why economists often describe tariffs as a double-edged sword. They might help in one area, but hurt in another.
For English learners, here are some key phrases from this discussion: protectionism, economic strategy, negotiation power, and trade deficit. These words help you describe how countries interact in the business world. For example, you could say, the NT used protectionism to support local industries, or trade deficits can lead to political tension. Understanding these terms helps you discuss global topics more confidently in English.
Now let's also think about the human side of these goals. Every government policy affects real people: workers, students, and families. When factories close or when products become more expensive, ordinary citizens face the consequences. The tariff war reminded the world that behind every economic policy, there are human stories. People trying to keep their jobs, pay their bills, and plan their futures.
That's such an important reminder. And it also shows why studying global economics is not just for experts. It's for everyone who wants to understand how the world around them works. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or a professional, understanding these topics can help you make better decisions, communicate effectively, and even find new opportunities in the future.
So, to summarize, the US aimed to reduce its trade deficit, protect local industries, and pressure China into new trade agreements. China aimed to defend its economic growth, promote its long-term technology plan, and show that it could compete on equal terms. Both nations believed they were acting in their national interest. but their actions shook the global market and affected nearly every country on Earth.
That's a great summary, Adam. And for our listeners, this is a perfect point to reflect. When you hear news about tariffs or trade wars, try to think about the deeper goals behind those actions. Governments rarely make these decisions without strategy. There's always an economic, political, or social reason behind them. Learning to analyze those reasons is a big step toward becoming globally aware, and also toward becoming a confident English speaker.
We'd love to know what our audience thinks. Do you believe tariffs can really protect local jobs, or do they create more problems for the economy? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this educational podcast, please like the video and subscribe to the English Globe. Your support helps us continue producing meaningful content for English learners around the world.
Thank you, dear listeners. You're an important part of this journey. In our next section, we'll explore how these goals affected real businesses, from factories to technology companies, and how they managed to survive or struggle during the tariff war. So stay with us, keep improving your English, and remember, knowledge of global issues is the key to understanding our shared future.
When the tariff war began, American businesses felt the shock almost immediately. Farmers, manufacturers, and technology companies found themselves caught in the middle of an economic struggle they did not start. For U.S. farmers, the effects were especially painful. China had been one of their largest buyers of soybeans, corn, and pork. When tariffs were added, Chinese companies began reducing purchases, leaving millions of tons of crops unsold. Many farmers faced serious losses, and some relied on government subsidies just to stay in business.
In China, the story unfolded differently but with equal intensity. Thousands of factories that exported goods to the US suddenly had to deal with new tariffs. To stay competitive, many manufacturers began shifting production to other Asian countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. This allowed them to avoid some of the new costs. At the same time, Chinese companies started focusing on domestic consumption and diversifying their markets in Europe and Africa. It was a massive shift in strategy aimed at long-term survival.
The American technology sector was also deeply affected. Companies like Apple, Intel, and HP relied heavily on parts made in China. When tariffs increased, costs rose sharply, and business leaders were forced to rethink supply chains. Some companies tried to move production to places like India or Mexico, but doing so was neither cheap nor easy. The tariff war taught U.S. businesses how vulnerable they had become to global trade tensions. It pushed them to search for more balanced and flexible production systems.
Chinese tech companies also faced new challenges, particularly those that sold products or components to American firms. Many of them had to invest in innovation and self-reliance, especially in the semiconductor and electronics industries. Companies began focusing on creating their own advanced technologies rather than depending on imports from the United States. This situation encouraged rapid progress in research and development, but it also exposed how deeply both nations depended on one another for critical technology.
Small American businesses felt the pressure too. Shops and manufacturers that imported low-cost goods from China suddenly found that their products were more expensive. Some tried to raise prices, but customers quickly reacted by buying less. Others looked for new suppliers, but that process took months and often came with quality problems. For many small business owners, the trade war was a harsh lesson in how global policies can impact local economies. It revealed that even small companies are part of a much larger economic network.
In China, small and medium enterprises also experienced stress as export orders from the US declined. Some factories had to reduce workers' hours or even shut down temporarily. To adapt, many entrepreneurs began selling more within China's growing domestic market. The Chinese government also introduced programs to help these businesses survive, including tax cuts and easier access to loans. This period became a test of flexibility and resilience for Chinese entrepreneurs, who had long relied on foreign buyers for their success.
Interestingly, not every industry suffered. Some American companies benefited when the government encouraged consumers to buy locally made products. A few industries, such as steel and aluminum, saw short-term growth because tariffs made foreign goods more expensive. However, those gains were limited, and many experts argued that the long-term damage to trade relations outweighed the temporary benefits. It became clear that protectionism, while popular with some groups, carries serious global risks.
In the end, both countries learned valuable lessons about economic interdependence. The tariff war proved that in a globalized world, no nation can fully separate its economy from another without facing consequences. For English learners and global citizens, this story highlights the importance of understanding how trade connects us all. Whether you live in Beijing, New York, or London, the price of your phone, your clothes, or even your food can be shaped by decisions made thousands of miles away.
When we look beyond the United States and China, it becomes clear that the tariff war between these two economic giants did not stay confined within their borders. The effects spread across the entire globe, touching every continent and almost every major economy in one way or another. You see, when two of the world's largest trading powers fight, the rest of the world feels the tremors. Global supply chains, the systems that connect factories, suppliers, and consumers across different countries, became unstable. Suddenly, the smooth flow of goods that had defined globalization for decades began to slow down. Prices rose, delivery times became unpredictable, and businesses everywhere started to feel uncertain about the future.
That's so true, Adam. For many countries in Europe and Asia, the US-China trade war created a wave of instability. Take Germany, for example. As one of the world's top exporters, Germany depends heavily on global trade. Many German companies sell cars, machines, and industrial tools to both the US and China. When demand from these two major markets dropped due to tariffs, German manufacturers experienced a slowdown. Factories that had once operated at full capacity began to cut back production. Even workers in countries like France, Italy, and Spain began to worry about job security because so many European industries are linked to global exports.
Yes, and if we shift our focus to Asia, the story becomes even more interesting. When US companies started moving their production out of China to avoid tariffs, several Southeast Asian nations saw new opportunities. Vietnam, for instance, became one of the biggest beneficiaries of this shift. Many companies opened factories there to continue manufacturing goods at low costs. As a result, Vietnam's exports to the U.S. increased sharply during the trade war years. The same happened in Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. However, this sudden economic boost came with challenges too. Rising demand led to higher land prices, worker shortages, and environmental pressures. In a way, Southeast Asia became the new manufacturing center, but it also had to learn to manage rapid industrial growth.
Meanwhile, countries that rely heavily on raw materials, such as Australia, Brazil, and Russia, also felt the effects. China is one of the largest importers of metals, oil, and agricultural goods. When its economy slowed down due to tariffs, it began buying less from these suppliers. For example, Australia's iron ore exports to China temporarily declined, affecting mining companies and government revenues. Similarly, Brazil faced changes in demand for its agricultural exports. At first, Brazil's soybean farmers benefited because China started buying from them instead of the US, but that growth was unstable. It depended entirely on political and economic tensions, meaning that one shift in trade policy could change everything overnight.
Another important area affected by the trade war was investment. When businesses face uncertainty about trade policies, they hesitate to spend money on new factories or equipment. Investors worry that if tariffs suddenly increase, their profits could disappear. This uncertainty caused a global slowdown in investment between 2018 and 2020. In Europe, companies delayed expansion plans. In Japan and South Korea, export-driven businesses began to hold back on hiring new workers. Even developing nations in Africa and Latin America noticed a decline in foreign direct investment. The whole world became cautious, waiting to see how the US and China would resolve their conflict.
And then there's the question of prices. When tariffs raise the cost of raw materials and parts, those costs eventually reach consumers. For example, if steel becomes more expensive because of tariffs, car manufacturers must pay more to build vehicles. That means car prices increase not only in the US and China, but also in markets like Canada, the UK, and India. Everyday items, from electronics to furniture, became more expensive in many parts of the world. Inflation, which measures how prices rise, started to grow faster in some economies. This was especially hard for developing countries, where people spend a large part of their income on basic goods.
Let's not forget how financial markets reacted to all this. Investors around the world watched trade news carefully. When tensions between the US and China escalated, global stock markets often fell. Each time a new tariff was announced, investors became nervous, and stock values dropped. For example, in mid-2019, when both nations announced new rounds of tariffs, the Dow Jones in the US and major European stock indexes fell sharply. The uncertainty made global investors move their money to safer assets like gold or government bonds. It's another reminder of how interconnected our financial systems are. When fear spreads in one part of the world, it affects everyone.
Africa's experience during the trade war was also unique. Many African nations have growing trade relationships with both the US and China. China invests heavily in African infrastructure, building roads, railways, and power plants, while the US provides investment in technology and education. When trade tensions grew, some African countries worried about losing support from either side. However, this situation also encouraged them to develop more balanced trade relations and strengthen intra-African trade. The African Continental Free Trade Area, for example, gained more attention as nations realized the importance of regional cooperation to reduce dependence on global superpowers.
Yes, Julia, and in Latin America, the effects were mixed as well. Countries like Mexico and Chile experienced both challenges and opportunities. Mexico, being geographically close to the United States, saw a rise in manufacturing investment as companies looked for alternatives to China. American businesses moved some of their factories to Mexico to reduce shipping costs and avoid tariffs. This process, often called nearshoring, helped Mexico's economy grow. However, other nations like Chile, Argentina, and Peru, which export raw materials to China, faced reduced demand as China's economy slowed. These examples show how a single conflict between two powerful nations can create a web of reactions across the globe.
If we look at Europe again, we can see that the European Union found itself in a very difficult position. On one hand, it wanted to maintain strong trade relations with the United States, but on the other, China was a critical partner for European industries, especially in technology and green energy. European leaders began to discuss new trade strategies that would reduce dependence on either side. Some European companies even started building factories in Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe to balance the risks. The EU also strengthened its internal trade systems, emphasizing cooperation among member states to protect against external shocks.
All these examples lead to an important conclusion for our listeners. The modern global economy is deeply interconnected. A trade war between two countries can create ripple effects that touch factories, farms, and families in places thousands of miles away. It shows that global trade is like a network. If one part weakens, the entire system feels the impact. For English learners studying this topic, it's useful to focus on key vocabulary like supply chains, tariffs, exports, imports, inflation, and investment. These words describe the movement of goods, money, and opportunity around the world. Understanding them helps us see how economies depend on cooperation rather than conflict.
Absolutely, Adam. The US-China tariff war taught the world a powerful lesson, that no nation operates in isolation anymore. Every product we use, from a smartphone to a simple t-shirt, often has parts and labor from several different countries. When trade tensions disrupt these connections, it doesn't just affect governments or big corporations, it reaches ordinary people everywhere. It reminds us why dialogue, diplomacy, and fair trade are essential for keeping the global economy stable. For our listeners, this story is not only about politics or economics, it's about how global cooperation affects our daily lives, our jobs, and even the prices we pay at the store.
That's a great point to end this section on, Julia. The global ripple effect of the US-China trade war reminds us that every decision in international trade creates consequences far beyond national borders. It affects jobs, investments, and opportunities in ways we often don't realize. The more we learn about these connections, the better we can understand the world economy, and the better prepared we are as global citizens.
When people hear about a trade war or tariffs, it can sound like something that only affects governments, economists, or big companies. But the truth is that these policies reach into the lives of ordinary people everywhere. Every time tariffs increase, prices in shops slowly start to rise. It may not happen overnight, but after a few months, consumers begin to notice the difference. Everyday products, from smartphones and clothes to cars and even basic groceries, become more expensive. The reason is simple. When it costs more for companies to import goods, they often pass those extra costs on to customers. So, while the trade war is a political or economic issue on the surface, its effects are deeply personal for millions of families around the world.
That's right, Julia. Let's take a simple example, a smartphone. Most smartphones today are designed in one country, have parts made in several others, and are assembled in yet another. For instance, a phone designed in California might use chips made in Taiwan, screens from South Korea, and assembly in China. When tariffs are applied to Chinese goods, the final cost of that phone increases because each part of the production chain becomes more expensive. A phone that used to cost $800 might now cost $850 or more, not because of new features or better technology, but simply because of higher import taxes. Consumers don't always realize it, but this small price increase is part of the larger trade tension between nations.
And the same logic applies to cars. Many car companies build different parts in multiple countries: engines in Germany, electronics in Japan, tires in South Korea, and final assembly in China or Mexico. When tariffs make imported parts more expensive, car companies must pay more to build their vehicles. To protect their profits, they raise prices for buyers. This means someone shopping for a new car in the US, Europe, or even Africa ends up paying more, even if that car was not made in China or America. The trade war created a domino effect. When two large economies fight, the impact spreads across the global supply chain and eventually lands on the consumer's bill.
Inflation is another key issue that comes from this. When prices rise for imported goods, it affects not only luxury items like phones and cars, but also basic products like food and clothing. For example, if tariffs increase the cost of agricultural imports such as soybeans, corn, or cooking oil, then grocery stores need to pay more to buy them. This higher cost is passed on to customers, making meals slightly more expensive. And when food prices rise, it affects everyone, from low-income families to middle-class households. Even small increases, such as 10 cents on a loaf of bread or $1 on a bag of rice, add up over time, especially for families who already live on tight budgets.
Yes, Adam, and it's also important to talk about how this affects workers. When companies face higher import taxes, they often try to reduce costs elsewhere. Sometimes they cut jobs, delay salary increases, or move factories to cheaper locations. This can create job insecurity for many people, especially those working in industries connected to international trade. A factory worker in Malaysia, a truck driver in the US, or a supplier in India. All of them can feel the effects of tariff decisions made thousands of miles away. The trade war doesn't just influence prices, it can shape people's employment opportunities and income levels too.
You're absolutely right, Julia. Let's also consider small businesses. Many local shops and online sellers depend on affordable imported goods. When tariffs make those goods more expensive, small businesses must choose between raising their prices or reducing their profits. Neither option is easy. If they raise prices, they risk losing customers. If they don't, they earn less money. For example, a small electronics store in New York that imports cables, adapters, and headphones from China may see its costs rise by 20 or 30%. That might not sound like much, but in business, that difference can determine whether the store survives or shuts down.
Consumers also experience the impact in more subtle ways. Sometimes companies try to hide rising costs by changing their products. For example, a food company might keep the same price on a chocolate bar, but make it slightly smaller. A practice known as shrinkflation. You still pay the same amount, but you get less product. This strategy has become more common in recent years as companies try to balance higher costs without scaring away customers with obvious price increases. These small changes may not seem important at first, but over time, they show how deeply trade tensions affect every level of consumer life.
The housing and electronics industries are other areas where consumers have felt the pinch. Many building materials, like steel, aluminum, and wood, come from international suppliers. When tariffs increased, so did construction costs. This made houses, apartments, and even furniture more expensive. Similarly, for electronics, tariffs on Chinese-made parts affected computers, televisions, and gaming devices. A laptop that cost $500 before the trade war might now cost $550 or $600. This might not seem dramatic, but when you add up the effect across millions of consumers, it results in billions of dollars in additional expenses globally.
For English learners, this topic is not only about economics, but also about understanding daily life vocabulary. When we talk about tariffs, inflation, cost of living, and supply chains, we're really talking about the way money moves in our world. These words help describe the invisible forces that shape our daily experiences. When someone says, the cost of living has gone up, part of that increase might be due to trade tensions that make imported goods more expensive. Understanding this connection helps us see that global issues are never far away. They affect our shopping carts, our energy bills, and even our savings accounts.
Exactly, Julia. And we should remember that not all consumers are affected equally. Wealthier households might not notice small price increases, but for lower-income families, even a small rise in prices can make a big difference. For example, if the price of cooking oil or rice increases by 10%, a family living paycheck to paycheck may have to cut back on other essentials. This shows that trade policies are not just about economics. They are also about fairness and the distribution of wealth. When nations engage in trade conflicts, the poorest people often suffer the most because they have the least ability to absorb higher costs.
And beyond prices, there's also the emotional and psychological impact. People begin to feel uncertain about the economy. When they hear constant news about trade wars, falling stocks, or job losses, they become more careful with spending. Families postpone buying new cars or electronics. This slower spending cycle affects businesses, which then affects workers, and the cycle continues. The tariff war between the US and China showed how easily consumer confidence can be shaken by global uncertainty. When people stop spending, economies slow down, and that can lead to even more problems.
So, when we talk about tariffs and trade wars, we're really talking about the flow of everyday life, A student buying a new laptop for school, a family planning a vacation, or a small shopkeeper trying to restock supplies, all of them are touched by these economic decisions. It's a reminder that global issues are not distant or abstract. They live in the prices we see, the jobs we have, and the choices we make every day. For English learners, understanding this connection helps make economics feel more real and human, rather than just numbers and charts.
That's a great way to put it, Adam. The everyday impact of the tariff war teaches us that global economics is not just for experts. It's for everyone to understand. Each one of us plays a small part in this interconnected system. By learning the language of trade and economics, English learners gain the power to understand the world around them more clearly. And perhaps with more awareness, people can also push for policies that make trade fairer and more stable for everyone.
Exactly, Julia. The global economy works best when it supports ordinary people, the workers, the families, and the small business owners. When trade tensions grow, those are the people who feel it most. By exploring how the tariff war affects daily life, we see that economics isn't just about statistics. It's about people, choices, and communities. And that's why learning about it, in simple and clear English, is such an important step toward becoming a more informed global citizen. Looking back at the US-China tariff war, one of the clearest lessons is how deeply interconnected the global economy has become. No country operates in isolation anymore. Decisions made in Washington or Beijing can ripple across continents, affecting businesses, workers, and consumers in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The trade war showed that when large economies act aggressively, other nations feel the consequences. Supply chains are disrupted, prices rise, and investments slow down. For English learners, understanding this idea of global economic interdependence is essential. It means that countries rely on one another, and actions in one place can have effects thousands of miles away.
Absolutely, Adam. Another lesson is that cooperation is more effective than confrontation. Countries that tried to work together, negotiating agreements, finding compromises, and maintaining dialogue, were able to reduce the damage of the conflict. When nations focus on cooperation, it not only stabilizes their own economies, but also strengthens the global system. For example, by signing the Phase 1 trade agreement, both the US and China were able to pause some tariffs, restore some trade flows, and build trust for future discussions. This demonstrates that even in disagreements, dialogue and compromise are far more productive than prolonged conflict.
Yes, Julia. And beyond cooperation, the trade war also highlighted the importance of economic sustainability. Nations and businesses realized that short-term gains from tariffs or protectionist policies often come with long-term costs. Raising tariffs might protect local industries temporarily, but it can harm consumers, increase inflation, and destabilize international relations. Sustainable economic practices, such as balanced trade, responsible investment, and predictable policies, are essential for maintaining stable growth. For English learners, terms like sustainability and responsible trade are useful vocabulary because they describe not just economics, but the long-term thinking needed for a stable global system. Another takeaway is the importance of communication and diplomacy. Economic issues are rarely solved by tariffs alone. Dialogue, negotiations, and mutual understanding remain the most effective tools. The Phase 1 agreement is just one example. It helped both nations avoid further escalation, protected jobs, and restored some confidence in the global economy. This teaches us that talking through problems, even with competitors or rivals, can prevent crises and build long-term stability. For English learners, the term diplomacy is particularly useful because it describes not just politics, but the art of resolving conflicts peacefully.
Absolutely. The tariff war also highlighted the human side of economics. Prices, employment, and investment decisions are not just numbers. They affect millions of lives. Families notice higher costs. Workers face uncertainty. and small businesses struggle to survive. Understanding economics in this way makes it more relatable. For learners, using simple examples like price increases for food, cars, or smartphones helps connect abstract economic concepts to everyday life. It shows that global events are never far removed from our daily experiences.
Finally, the key lesson is that global challenges require global solutions. No country can solve complex economic problems alone. Whether it's trade, climate change, or technological disruption, nations must cooperate to find sustainable solutions. The US-China trade war showed both the risks of conflict and the benefits of negotiation. For English learners, this reinforces vocabulary and concepts such as global cooperation, interdependence, and sustainable growth. These ideas are essential for understanding how the world functions today and how decisions in one part of the globe affect everyone else.
Exactly, Adam. In conclusion, the US-China tariff war is more than just an economic story. It's a lesson in how interconnected our world has become. Cooperation, fairness, sustainability, and resilience are not just abstract concepts. They are essential for the health of the global economy. By learning the language and principles behind these events, English learners gain the ability to understand international news, discuss global issues, and see the direct connection between economic policy and daily life.
Yes, Julia. The tariff war reminds us that we live in a shared economic world. Every policy, every negotiation, and every decision creates ripple effects that touch people across continents. Understanding these lessons helps us appreciate how interconnected we are and why cooperation and fairness are crucial. For learners, grasping this vocabulary and these concepts opens the door to a deeper understanding of global events and their real-life impacts. As we reach the final part of our discussion, it's natural to wonder, can the world avoid another trade war in the future? The US-China tariff conflict taught us many lessons, but it also highlighted risks that could repeat if nations are not careful. Globalization has connected economies in ways that make conflicts more visible and impactful. Any future disagreements could quickly ripple across continents, affecting prices, jobs, and investments. However, history also shows that when countries choose dialogue over confrontation, negotiation over aggression, and cooperation over isolation, they can prevent large-scale conflicts from escalating.
Yes, Adam. One of the main ways to avoid another trade war is through open communication and technological cooperation. Nations need to share knowledge, establish fair regulations, and respect each other's intellectual property rights. For example, countries investing in clean energy, artificial intelligence, and communication technologies can collaborate instead of competing destructively. By focusing on innovation and shared goals, they not only promote growth but also reduce the temptation to use tariffs as a first solution. This approach benefits businesses, governments, and consumers alike. For English learners, words like cooperation, innovation, and intellectual property are essential to understand the modern economy.
Another important factor is fair trade practices. Countries must create rules that ensure everyone competes on equal terms. This includes eliminating hidden subsidies, enforcing transparent policies, and encouraging ethical business standards. Fair trade helps prevent disputes from escalating into full-scale tariff wars. It also builds trust between nations, which is essential for long-term stability. The more predictable and transparent global trade becomes, the less likely nations are to resort to aggressive measures that hurt everyone. Vocabulary like fair trade, subsidies, and transparency is useful for learners because it connects economics to real-world problem-solving.
Exactly, Adam. Another way to prevent conflicts is by strengthening international organizations and agreements. Institutions like the World Trade Organization provide frameworks where disputes can be resolved peacefully and fairly. Multilateral agreements, where many nations come together to set standards, reduce the need for unilateral tariffs or retaliations. When countries commit to these rules, they create stability and predictability in global markets. For learners, this introduces important concepts like multilateral agreements, regulations, and international frameworks, which are often used in discussions about diplomacy and trade.
It's also crucial for countries to balance national interests with global responsibilities. Every nation wants to protect its industries, jobs, and citizens. But in a connected world, extreme protectionism often backfires. Policies that favor long-term cooperation and shared benefits over short-term gains are more sustainable. Businesses, governments, and consumers all benefit when trade is stable and predictable. For English learners, the term protectionism is very useful because it often appears in news about tariffs and trade disputes, and understanding it helps explain why global economic conflicts happen.
Another key lesson for the future is the importance of education and informed citizens. When people understand how trade works and how policies affect daily life, they are better equipped to make decisions, whether as voters, business leaders, or consumers. English learners can benefit from following global news, reading articles, and discussing topics like trade, tariffs, and diplomacy. This helps build not only vocabulary, but also critical thinking skills. Knowledge empowers people to participate in conversations about economics and international relations, even if they are not experts.
And let's not forget resilience and adaptability. Even if tensions arise, countries, companies, and individuals can prepare by diversifying markets, improving supply chains, and investing in technology. Learning from past mistakes is essential. For example, businesses that adapted during the US-China tariff war were able to survive and even grow despite challenges. This shows that preparation and flexibility can soften the impact of future conflicts and make the global economy more robust. Vocabulary like resilience, adaptability, and diversification helps learners understand how both nations and individuals can respond to economic challenges.
Ultimately, the future depends on how well nations balance competition with collaboration. Conflicts may arise, but they do not have to become full-scale trade wars if countries are willing to communicate, negotiate, and respect shared rules. Technological cooperation, fair trade, strong international frameworks, and informed citizens all contribute to a safer and more stable global economy. For English learners, understanding these concepts gives context to world events and prepares them to engage with global news in a meaningful way.
Yes, Julia. And while the possibility of future trade tensions exists, there is also reason to be optimistic. The lessons learned from the US-China tariff war, the importance of diplomacy, fair trade, technological cooperation, and global awareness can guide countries to avoid repeating the same mistakes. The world has the tools to manage disputes peacefully, and by prioritizing dialogue over confrontation, nations can protect businesses, jobs, and consumers everywhere.
Exactly, Adam. For our listeners, the key takeaway is that global events affect all of us, but we can learn to understand them and respond wisely. By building vocabulary, staying informed, and thinking critically, English learners can grasp complex topics like trade wars, tariffs, and diplomacy. These are not just abstract concepts. They influence our daily lives, the prices we pay, and the opportunities we have in an interconnected world.
So, as we conclude today's episode, remember this. The future of the global economy depends on cooperation, fairness, and knowledge. Each one of us can play a role by staying informed, using what we learn, and communicating clearly. For English learners, understanding global economics is not only about language. It's about seeing how the world works and how we all connect, no matter where we live.
Yes, Adam. Stay curious, keep learning, and always look for opportunities to expand your understanding of the world. Trade wars and economic challenges will continue to appear, but with knowledge, dialogue, and cooperation, we can navigate them successfully. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on the English Globe. Keep practicing your English, stay informed, and remember that understanding the world begins with understanding the language that describes it.